So here's something I've never done on the podcast before, which is sit down across from my co-author and my husband, Seth Day, and get to interview you about this book that how long have we been working on this book now?
It feels like decades, but let's see. We wrote it this last year, but the deal before that, about a year before that. So it feels like a 2-year process. It feels like it.
Yeah, so it's like I think it was like a 2-year process. Actually for you, this is a story people won't hear anywhere else. um, Before when we went on our very first date. Do you remember that? Sitting at the beach, and I said to you, I had just actually gotten a publication agreement for my first book. And I said that to you, and I remember there was like this shock in your face. Why was there shock in your face?
Yeah. So I don't know how much of the backstory to get into this at this moment, but essentially, really low point in my life. And then we had just gotten reconnected, and it was the first time we were hanging out. And one of the things that I was doing even earlier that week was writing in a journal. Long story short, I was at home. Uh, I wasn't driving. I was symptoms of PTSD, I think, really set in uh, from the loss of my brother fairly recently, and it all kind of just compounded, and then I just shut down and not really knowing what was going on, and had all these symptoms of vertigo. I was in Tennessee. My brother drove down to Tennessee and picked me up. I didn't know what was happening. I'm like, listen, am I dying? My brother had just died. I'm like, it's not out of reality. Like, do I have cancer too? What's going on? But really, it was high amounts of stress and cortisol and undealt grief. So I had shut down, and I was at home, and I just said, I want to tell my story someday. And I want to tell Tyler's story, more importantly, someday, about his battle with cancer, and giving his life to God while he was dying of cancer, essentially carried into the baptismal tank. And it was a really powerful moment. As painful as it was powerful. I could also see the presence of God there, gracefully through that suffering. And so I had started, while I was at home, writing down in a journal, because I was at home. I didn't have really, I think, the ability to sit and type on a computer. I just had a notepad next to the bed, wondering what my future was going to hold, going to all these doctor's appointments and jotting down a story. And then we get connected, and then we hang out, and you tell me that you're writing a book, and my jaw dropped.
And so in a lot of ways, and you've said this to me before, that you really felt the Holy Spirit say to you, one day I will let you tell this story. And so in a lot of ways, I'll See You Tomorrow, our book that released this week, which we're super, I mean, what an experience. But in a lot of ways, for you especially, Seth, this has been a 13-year journey. So we always start our episodes by me doing some digging on social media. Now, you are new to social media, but I was able to find a quote from you. It's actually a quote from chapter 2 of our book, I'll See You Tomorrow. And we're in the middle of a podcast journey on healing. Actually, this isn't the middle. This is the last episode of our podcast journey on healing. And I wanted to end by looking at how do we heal from our relational hurt or the things that don't feel ideal in our lives right now. And so here's a quote that I'm pulling from you. It's posted on your Instagram. It's from chapter 2 of I'll See You Tomorrow. And it says this: Scripture doesn't say with God, all things are ideal. It says with God, all things are still possible. What did you mean by that when you wrote that?
So as we were writing this book, and you're just looking for the right words as you tell your stories, or what stories to share, it just came out on paper, literally, like or I should say, on the pages of the document I was typing in. And I was just typing, And I didn't realize that I had actually written that as I was sharing a story from my childhood, which is a story that I've never told before. I opened chapter 2 sharing the story. And then it just kind of came out. And then I sat in that going, this is actually really, really profound.
Actually, hold on, I don't wanna rush past that because the story is really incredible. How does chapter 2 open? It's the first time you ever went to church is how you open it, but what's the story?
Yeah. So my mother, and also I want to say I want to extend a deep level of I think grace to my father and forgiveness as well. So my point for sharing any stories in there is not to call out his absence. It's just to point out the fact of how that it affected me. Because I know that he is a human being at this point in life who I would say had a short stick himself. And so he didn't have the tools to navigate fatherhood. And so I can realize that now. I couldn't realize that at 16, 17 years old. And so essentially, one of the stories that it opens with, the story it opens with, is my mother saying, "Get off the hood of my car, Cecil," which was my father's name. And she had these three young men in the back seat of her car.
And who aren't men, they're children.
Young men, yeah, sure.
How old were you?
Oh man, I looking back, I couldn't have been older than like 7 or so. Around that age, my older brother would have been about 8, 8.5, and my younger brother was a few years younger than me. So we're all sitting buckled in one of those cold mornings, and my father, there's this thud on the hood of the car, and he jumps on the hood of the car, and they start.
'Cause he knew you were going to church, or
He knew we were going to church for one of the first times, and my mother cracks her window and she says, "Get off the hood of my car, Cecil." Because here's the thing, I think that he knew she was leaving, that this was just one of those kind of like sealing the deal things, that she wanted more out of life at that moment. She wanted more for her kids. She wasn't happy with the lifestyle that was being portrayed for us. And she had a little bit of an experience with Christianity earlier in life, and that was something that she wanted for us. And so, literally on faith and probably a quarter tank of gas, being a young mother, she decided to still put that car in reverse with my father on the hood of that car. And as they're yelling and her windows cracked just enough, saying, "Get off the car, Cecil. I'm going. This is it." And he grips that hood even tighter. And then she puts the car in drive, and there goes Cecil into the ditch. And there goes my mother with us three in the back seat of that car down that country road. And so, what I learned, and this was just the beginning of a very long journey, that day that my mother decided to put her children first, to put essentially God first, and this calling in her life that there's something more, did not make life easier, Heather. It didn't make life easier. And talk about this in the book. It didn't mean that everything was peachy. I mean, we grew up in government housing, as I'm sure many people have. We grew up on food stamps, as I'm sure many people listening to this podcast can probably resonate with. And we relied heavily on aunts and grandparents to help get groceries and pick us up from school and all these things.
the janitor actually of our private school where we met would come on a Friday, right? You guys would pull up late after school and he would put the school lunches in your mom's trunk.
Yeah. When my mother went back to school, and she sent us to the private school, which is a whole story in itself. I'm not sure if I should share how that happened financially, but it was literally like a miracle that we were able to attend this school. And so every Friday, my mother was also a part-time janitor, and she had 3 jobs and with 3 kids, and was going to school, taking like as many credits as she could. We didn't have a lot of money, and so she would leave that school, pick us up. We'd go eat lunch or something, and then when everyone left to school, she would pull that car back in after everyone was gone, like clockwork. Every Friday, all three of us would jump out, and there would be the school custodian with an entire rolling tray full of bread and leftover milk and all the snacks from the school lunches for that week, and he would pile them in the car, and that's what we would live on. Hmm. And so, looking at back at the story, it my mother has taught me, God has taught me, that if we wait for the ideal in life, that doesn't always come. But what God often does give us is what's possible. And I have wasted so much time in my life waiting for the ideal that I forgot to search for what is possible. And so it's been very healing to be able to put that into a book, and hopefully that it will help someone else in their journey too.
I remember when you wrote that line and I like slapped your arm and I said, "Seth, this is that is it for me was just really convicting over my own life and I hope is super convicting for a lot of people." A lot of your story in the book is about the things that make relationships difficult. And so I just want everyone to understand Seth and I have very different lived experiences. And so when I told him I wanted to write a book about how relationships could save us, what did you say?
If only it were that easy.
That was his reaction. And so I realized I needed to write the book with him because your lived experience is different than mine. And I think, as does relationship, right? Which is why relationship is so important in this world. You help me to see things that I would miss or would not be sensitive to, or my optimism often might just like brush over. And so, go ahead. You want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say I think that the same is true in the other way, and I think that a lot of relationships, whether they're romantic or friendships, like it's been your optimism that has pulled me out from staying in this stuck position in life. There have been times where, listen, I can't change things, or maybe it's a mistake that I've done, or maybe it's something that's happened to me in the past, and you have said, listen, the only way out of this is to get your hands dirty because you're in this situation and you've got to grab a shovel and you've got to do the work if you want to see a different result. And so I will tell whoever's listening, I would not be here, even in this office, having this teaching job, working on another graduate degree, if I had not had people, and whether we happen to be married, but certainly we have an awesome friendship as well. When you had looked me in the eyes and said, I believe in you. And after failing out of college 3 times, I said, I do want this for my life. I chose to believe that. And you can testify to this, that it's never easy when someone attempts to make a change in their life. Heather, can you speak to, I forget what that rule or that concept is, when we want to fall back on something, in case someone who is listening, because I think the book at the heart of it, this concept is portrayed in many different ways. When we mess up in our lives, we're so hard on ourselves. But what did you always say this, and I hear you explain this to students about looking at the time in between, the distance between that. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, because this is a whole other conversation, but I just think sex is something we need to do a better job talking about in the church. There's so much shame there. I have so many students that truly like don't want to go to church anymore. And it's not because they don't want God. It's because they feel unworthy because of different sexual decisions that they've made. And I do think it's something where even our generation, when we had a cell phone, all it did was dial, right? And I didn't even have like it wasn't free until after 9 o'clock. So I couldn't even use it most of the day. But for my students today who are 2019, they've grown up with unlimited access to the internet in their rooms. A lot of them have made poor choices. And so they struggle with the reality of the choices that they've made, especially as it relates to pornography and sex and different things. And so when they come to me and say like, "I'm a porn addict." And I say, "First of all, words mean things. Addicts are wasting time and wasting resources and burning relationships. Is that true? Or are you just somebody who watches porn?" Because I do think there is a difference. And sometimes we'll label ourselves as something. And now that's my identity. And brother or sister, I say, that is not who you are, right? That is something that you have done. There is a difference. And then I ask them, let's look at how many days in between that you've watched porn, right? Because a lot of times they'll say, well, I watched porn again. Well, how many days in between the last time that you watched it? And for the last student I talked to, it had been 6 months. And they were beating themselves up because, and not saying that it's a good choice. Of course it's not. But let's look at who you were for the last. If I go to the gym every day and one day I don't, and all I do is eat and watch TV, am I like now somehow some like ungym person? No, I made a choice. But the reality of the consistency of my choices is that on most days, I am somebody who goes to the gym. And so I just think we have to put more days in between. A righteous man, this is scripture, a righteous man falls down 7 times, but gets up 8. The wicked fall once and they just stay down. So how do we encourage people to get back up?
Can I take that concept, because I think that you do a phenomenal job of this in the book, and it's this has been helpful for me because for someone, and if you're listening and you struggle to form relationships, like, we can have strong relationships with people if we take that principle, but the second something isn't perfect in that relationship, instead of looking at the 50 good days that we've spent with this person and this friendship, and this is where I want you to talk about it, or this last 2 years, we'll have that day or that weekend where maybe they weren't the best friend. And you have to define what that looks like. Maybe it was truly a harmful thing, but maybe because we're in such a cancel culture, they did something that was offensive but definitely forgivable, and we're so quick to throw out that relationship, and we're forgetting that what is the actual consistency when you grab that relationship and hold it in your hands. Is it betrayal, or is it letting you down, or is it honestly someone who's been there for you pretty well over the last 2 years? And so I think that's important. I think that's honestly the subtitle of our book is like building relational resilience when you want to quit. And I think that's important to remember. And I've learned that through even writing this book.
A lot of the stories that you tell in the book is about the grief of losing your brother 2 days after his 19th birthday, and you went away to college, and I think the idea there was, I just wanna get far away from this, right? From my home and what's happening and what I can't control, so I'm just gonna start over. And so you went far away, halfway across the country to college, and what happened in that experience for you?
Yeah. So I went to a surrounding or a place where I thought would be a good thing, but it really turned out that for me, that it wasn't, because I lost the entire support system, the church family that was there, everything. Just I was in a new place, and I what happened was I felt very misunderstood because uh, not everyone, because I was in such a deep state of grief. And when you're around people you don't know, especially college students, people just want to have fun. They want to have fun, and they don't want to be around the depressing guy all the time. And I could not help. It was almost as if the more time went on, the deeper the grief went, because I wasn't sharing my story. Now that I teach a class in grieving and loss, I understand that grievers must share their story, like at a psychological level. It's how they process it, and it's how they help to heal it. And also, if you're not sharing it, you will never be able to derive meaning from it, because it's all just built up. You must get it out. It's a way of processing and making sense and ultimately finding meaning to that. And I didn't have that when I went away. And so I sat in grief day after day as a young man, and then ended up just failing my entire year of college. In short, yeah, it was really a tough experience.
You ended up eventually coming to Andrews University, which is where you and I had connected again. And you never would have thought, as you came here as a kid, 19 or whatever years old, in depression, in grief, actually living out of your truck, um, not even financially cleared to get in the dorm. So living in your truck, would you have ever thought that God would take that kid and allow him to become a professor at the same university, write a book and tell his all these things? So I just want people, because somebody is listening right now and they are still in the truck. Right? And I know when you're in the truck, it is so hard to ever see yourself outside of it. Actually, you say this in the book, which I think is so powerful as it relates to church. You have this quote where you talk about, and you were a pastor, and you say, because of that experience with your mom, with her trying to get to church and having your dad be on the hood of her car literally before she even stepped foot in there, you say, be so careful as people walk into your church, because you have no idea who was on their hood before they stepped into your church. Right? So how have these experiences, Seth, changed how you see relationship, the grace you give maybe to a student who says, I don't know, like I don't feel worthy even of it? How does this change how you experience people in life and give advice?
There's a principle in the book. Um, it's biblical based on Barna research, and it's on forgiveness, but I think it definitely applies to this. Essentially, that those who have been given or been shown radical forgiveness are more likely to extend radical forgiveness to others if they've experienced it. And for me, because I have experienced, I'll say first from God, radical grace in my life, that I shouldn't be here. Sharing our stories is powerful. It helps me to want to extend that radical grace to others, to that student who shouldn't make it. I want to have them sit in my office and let's get you caught up, whatever it takes, when maybe someone else may dismiss them, because I was that student who so desperately needed that. And although that's on forgiveness, I think that it applies to relationships in many different facets of it. To what we've been shown is what we give. So, first by God and also by others. Um, I would not be here if it was not for a. So, I'll say this: relationships are often what break us in life, but relationships are the very thing which bring us healing at the same time. And so, if we try to heal ourselves in isolation because we have been broken by someone, I think it will only go so far. Um, and it's risky to put yourself back out there. And I think that there needs to be new boundaries that are also set up, and you need to be more cautious. I understand all these things that go into it, um, but also there is this element that we are, as human beings, you're a communication professor, you say this all the time, wired for communication. In other words, we're wired relationally. And you're the one who always says this, right? The breakdown of the 10 commandments: love God and love man. You say this. Your relationship with God is only as strong as your relationship with your brothers and sisters here on earth. And so, this is why not only is forgiveness so needed, that doesn't always mean that person will be a part of your life, but certainly it should help to be a lens in which we can see and interpret the world through the eyes of truly taking that upon ourselves, that humanity, we need each other. We are stronger together.